A story we've been following, and we've had the lady on who, Kelly is her name, who runs a shop in Washington, got shut down, was fighting it, and then the powers that be were trying to bring her down, bring other people down with her. We've had a good development in this subject. We were talking about a rally coming up this Saturday. That's still going to happen, but we have a new developing situation. So Joey Gibson is with me and attorney Angus Lee, who is Kelly's lawyer. I want to first get a statement from Angus before Joey gives us an update on the status of the event this weekend. Angus Lee, Kelly's lawyer here. Tell us what happened here to Kelly and what is the latest breaking good news?
Well, let me start with the good news. And the great news is that the charges are completely dismissed with prejudice, which means they can never be filed again against Miss Carroll. And that's fantastic for a couple of reasons. One, because she was completely innocent all along. Two, because this was a gross display of political persecution. It was not prosecution at all, it was persecution. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Miss Carroll was completely entitled to do what she was doing, but she spoke out publicly at the same time against some of these proclamations that are coming from King Inslee, also known as the governor of the state of Washington. And the city of Vancouver, unbeknownst to anyone, enacted an unconstitutional policy that they would actually target for prosecution those who were speaking out and leading protests, not people participating necessarily, but leaders of protests. And so because they targeted her as someone who had a protest in opposition to the lockdown orders, she was targeted for prosecution, even though, as they now admit, she was completely innocent. But now the case has been dismissed after we filed two motions, one to dismiss for lack of evidence and one to dismiss because this was clearly a selective prosecution. And we were able to make a series of public records requests to get the documents from them that showed that. Now, what was interesting is we filed that motion for selective prosecution, and it was supposed to be heard on this coming Tuesday. And yesterday, we were supposed to interview the primary officer at 10 in the morning. We had a scheduled interview for the primary officer of 10 in the morning. At 8:30 in the morning, roughly, I received notification that the prosecutor's office was going to cancel those interviews and dismiss the case. And I believe it is because they did not want me questioning that officer about, one, the policies, and two, the lack of evidence, and three, the discussions that went on in the prosecutor's office about why they decided to target and persecute this innocent woman.
Well, this is incredible. This is a communist, Marxist, totalitarian tactic to intentionally go after leaders to snuff out any sort of resistance to their tyranny. And by the way, the other good news is Angus Lee is bringing the ascot back. Okay, I've never seen somebody sport an ascot in such good fashion as Angus is right now live on the air. This is an incredible development. Really, we should keep you on even longer to just talk about that notion in general. I mean, this is clearly, I mean, let's not mince words here. I mean, use the correct nomenclature, legal terms here. But to me, this is a direct political attack on people they look at as political opposition to say, hey, you know what? It doesn't matter whether you broke the law or not. We're going to target you. We look at you as a leader, and we want to make an example of you so we have no dissidence.
Well, there's 2 points there, and you're absolutely right. The first is that you have to understand that since Governor Inslee declared a state of emergency, he has issued proclamation after proclamation after proclamation. And then those proclamations, which are, I believe, over 100 now, they're not reviewed by the legislature. And they conflict with each other, they're confusing, and they're constantly changing. And then he modifies them by memorandum, as though people are supposed to somehow be aware of all these edicts that are coming out of his office. And then this is a classic technique of totalitarian governments. What they do is you make it basically so that everyone is liable for some kind of criminal violation. And that way you can prosecute anyone you want selectively. Now, we know that's exactly what happened here because we discovered emails where there was one group that was willfully in violation of the law, The city contacted them and said, you're violating these proclamations, you're clearly acting illegally. And the city's internal emails, they said, we better not do anything with this one. And that wasn't the only example. The BLM march in Vancouver on 2020, June 19th, which was a totally peaceful protest, but was also in violation of the same exact order Miss Carroll was being prosecuted for at the time. So let me say that again. On June 19th, Miss Carroll was being prosecuted for violation of Proclamation 2025.3. That same proclamation forbid the BLM march. And the city didn't prosecute anyone for that. They didn't prosecute the leaders for that. In fact, they facilitated a multi-hundred-person gathering, and they took photographs shoulder to shoulder with participants while the officers were not wearing masks. So on one hand, they're prosecuting Miss Carroll while she's actually innocent, and they're facilitating a violation of the exact same law that they're prosecuting her for. Now, you have to ask yourself, what's the difference? The difference is one group had a rally where they waved the American flag, and one group didn't.
And again, it just proves how the whole thing is political, folks. This isn't just rhetoric. This isn't just, food for fodder. This is really what's happening. Now, the great news here is that Kelly Carroll is not going to be dealing with these people, at least in the short term. My guess is they're probably going to come back after her in some way, shape, or form. But real quick, before we go back, and you know what, I'm going to bring you guys back for another segment here. But before we go to this break, Joey, give people an update. So what's the status of Saturday's event?
Saturday's event is still on. We're going to be out in front of Jonathan Young's house because he's got to go. What he did was completely unprofessional. It was immature. He's emotional. And so we don't want this man to be working in the city of Vancouver because he is trying to target people specifically for their beliefs, especially if you're a Christian. So that's still going to happen at 2 p.m. The information's at patriotprayerusa.com.
And as somebody who's been fighting with Kelly and who's been on the front lines of this since day one, Joey, what does it feel like having the total confirmation that they've been targeting you and people you're associated with, and that this whole stunt about picking and choosing who gets to operate and who doesn't is all based on politics?
Yeah, they got really sloppy and they got overly confident. They didn't expect Kelly Carroll to have the top constitutional lawyer in the state of Washington. They didn't expect for the community to come together and to back her. They didn't expect for Angus Lee to go through all the public information requests and to go through all the emails. And so it feels really good that the truth has come out. It feels good to know, now we know where we're at. Now the city of Vancouver knows where we're at. So now the community needs to respond. And what we're basically saying is never again. Never again are you going to charge one more person in our city. Not one more person. We're not going to allow you to weaponize these lockdown orders in order to stifle our free speech.
All right, Joey Gibson, I may have to kick you off the air. You're making me too jealous with the water behind you and the sun. I just don't know if I can handle it. Folks, I got this other news I got to cover, but let me tell you, Angus Lee and the work he's doing is literally heroic. We need more people like him, and so I'm going to bring him back for comments on this. Plus, when you wear an ascot that good, I mean, you get 2 segments. It's an unwritten rule of media. When your ascot matches your coat pocket square and it's in the beard, he's got to come back. We'll be right back. Folks, the good news is the corrupt establishment is crumbling. The players and parties involved in it are exposed. The bad news is they are in a death's fight right now to maintain everything that they've been building to destroy our country, our way of life, our civilization, and bring in this one world government. So it's really the time to be as focused and awake as possible. And thank God we have attorneys like Angus Lee out there who are fighting the good fight and putting in the good effort and standing for what's right in this country. And I wish more attorneys would take the leadership like he has. So I just want to get Angus's opinion on what he's discovered, because I believe, and I have no doubt, that what he's discovered in Washington with the political targeting and harassment of leaders fighting these tyrannical illegal orders, that this is happening in New York. We saw it happen in Dallas. We've seen it happen in Texas and other areas. So I have zero doubt that Angus has discovered something that's happening on a mass scale. He's just gone through the effort to show the evidence, find the evidence, present it in a court of law, and then have cases dropped. So, Angus, what do you make of what you discovered? And do you believe, as I do, that this applies on a national level and people need to know that this is happening?
Yeah, it is happening on a national level, almost certainly, but it's happening really where you're seeing it is more in the high population concentration areas, like we just recently saw in Missouri. And you're seeing it because there's been a shift in a lot of prosecutors' offices to move away from being strictly about enforcement of the law as passed by the legislature and more about advancing a political narrative and becoming very responsive to the flavor of the month, politically speaking. Whatever you're seeing a lot of political activity about, you're seeing prosecutors want to grandstand and highlight and jump on top of that. And it's really, really dangerous. And right now you're seeing a lot of them who are really, frankly, opposed to people who wave the American flag. This case with Kelly Carroll was not the first time that I've had to defend somebody in Washington because they were the victim but had waved the American flag. We had a young man who was waving the American flag at a Patriot Prayer event a couple years ago in downtown Vancouver. He was attacked by a mob of dozens in masks in broad daylight. He drove his car away from them without injuring any of them, and he ended up getting prosecuted for reckless driving. Now, that took a long time to fight that case, and we did a lot of the same things here. We ended up getting it dismissed, but there's a disturbing pattern of prosecutors who are really, frankly, just way too involved in the political back and forth and the partisanship, and they're just advancing a political narrative. And frankly, it's got to stop if we are to have a society that is ruled by laws and not these mobs that you're seeing on the screen right now.
And do you believe that this is a direct threat to our freedoms and our way of life in this country if it's not addressed immediately?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Because if we are not a nation of laws, then we are a nation of mobs. And you cannot have a democracy if you do not have rule of law. It's that simple. There's no parsing it any other way. If we don't have a constitutional republic where the government follows the rules of the Constitution and then applies the laws equally, and that's the key here, we're entitled to equal protection of the law. And right now, you're not seeing that in the city of Portland, where I'm handling a very serious case on a constitutional issue. You're not seeing it in many of our areas in the country, unfortunately.
It's sad to see this happen to America. The silver lining is Americans are actually seeing what's been behind some of these Democrat Party operatives and Soros prosecuting attorneys for so long, but they're seeing it and they're suffering from it. And so hopefully we can get rid of it now that we were actually seeing and having to face it. Angus Lee, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
All right.